Now I'm just going to open up the sheet view real quick so we can see that on a white background. So you can see how we can see our crosshatch patterning. We can see those different line weights in there. We've got the pattern that we added. See our wall ratings. And if we were to plot this as a grayscale drawing, we'd have all that heavy black line work, but we'd also have some grayscale elements such as the patterns and even these red lines for the grid lines and the fire ratings, which come in fairly dark, but slightly grayed out, so not as black as our black lines. Okay, now let's just go take a look at another drawing, which will be an elevation drawing. Okay, so this is an elevation drawing generated from our BIM model. And notice the patterns on the elevation, which represent different materials, brick, of course, down here, and just a linear sort of hatch pattern that's representing a corrugated metal. So this is a little trickier to set up than just the cut patterns, but let me walk you through it. So we are going to go to the Family and Part editor. But this time, we're going to go look at rendering properties. So as I was saying, these patterns which are on the forward or the reflected view are actually called geometry maps. So what we're doing is using the render material, which has a geometry map attached to it, and using that map pattern on the elevation. So I'm just going to select my brick part here. You can see it's got the render toggle on. It's got a materials.palette as the render palette. That happens to be something I created in my project materials DGN lib. And the render material is brick. So I'm going to right press on that and select properties, which will open up the materials editor to that brick material. Now, some of you may have been familiar with geometry maps in previous updates. In the latest update, where we've added the physically based rendering, so we're now using PBR materials. So if you notice here, there's a toggle up here which indicates I'm using physically based rendering settings or PBR materials. And if you notice on my settings here, I don't have an option for a geometry map. But if I toggle this off, so that this would be a legacy material, we would call it, and I have those legacy settings, and this is where I have the geometry map. Some of you may be familiar with this. So the geometry map, again, is just a pattern map that's attached to the material, and then it will be assigned to the forward view, wherever that material is used. So I'm going to open that dialog, and we can see here that we have this particular cell. Again, it's a pattern cell. If I browse, you can see I've got this geometry maps. Again, it's something I copied to my project and renamed, but there are in the delivered data set, these geometry maps. They're actually, I believe the delivered ones are in the Connect Shared Content folder. And you can see each one's just sort of a different brick pattern map. One thing to note is how all these patterns are in a gray toned color. Okay, that's the change I made when I copied it to my project. I'll explain the reasoning for that in a moment. So most of this is brick. There's some CMU patterns, and then even just some horizontal and vertical lines. That's how I'm doing the corrugated metal. So let's just cancel that because we already have one attached. And then you just set up a size, which is really going to determine the size of that pattern. So you kind of have to work that out with whatever scale you've drawn or whatever size you've drawn the pattern, that's what's going to determine how large those bricks are and so forth. But here's this toggle note here that says use cell colors. So I have that toggled on, and what that means is when that pattern gets applied in my drawing, it's going to use the color that's in the cell. I have all those gray toned cells, and that's why I'm getting gray toned patterns on my elevation. If I don't click that on, the pattern is going to be in the same color as the forward view symbology. So if my symbology is 0 or white, then my pattern is going to be white, and we won't get as much differentiation between the line work and the pattern. And that's why I chose to make the cells in that grayscale and then toggle this on, use cell color. So that's the setup for my geometry map. I'm going to close that. And then I'm going to toggle back to my physically based rendering. Now, even though I don't see it here, the PBR material is going to look to that legacy material for the geometry map. So it is, in fact, assigned. So I've got that assigned to the brick. I'll close that. And that's how the brick pattern is being assigned in these elevations. And I have a different one here for this corrugated metal. And then, of course, the other thing to watch for is you have to use a display style that has geometry maps turned on. So in other words, we're using that forward drawing display style. And you can see here geometry maps are turned on. If I were to toggle that off, we'll go ahead and close this and then do a reload. See, now the patterns don't show up, and I just have sort of a block elevation. Now note, while we're here, that you can see all my curtain wall framing is a weight 0. I kept that a lighter line weight. And then those walls, if you remember in the forward view, we had set to a weight 1, and that's the line weight we're seeing here. Now I actually went back, because one of the things we were taught way back when was to always pop your elevation out from the page. So in other words, take a heavier weight line and trace the very outer perimeter of the elevation to kind of help pop it off the page. And so again, that's just line work I added on top of my drawing. I just took a line string, weight 3, and traced around my elevation there. And then my entrance here pops away from the rest of the building. So I actually took a weight 2 line, you can see here, and just popped out that edge. So again, you might have to enhance your drawings just a little bit. It's always ideal to get as close to the final drawing as you can from the BIM model. But occasionally you might want to enhance the drawing a bit, and that's what I did here. I added a little bit of line work. I also added the ground line at the bottom and a little bit of shading, to give it that ground line. And let's go ahead and turn our patterns back on. I'm just going to, again, go look at it on the sheet, the white background. So there's that elevation drawing. Let's just fit the whole sheet. We can see we've also got the back drawing as well.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.